Thank you, Peggy, and thank you to CanBIM and Building Smart and SaskBIM for inviting me here as the keynote speaker. I'm pleased to be here today with all of you. So, as Peggy said, I'm Andrea Lee from the firm of Glaholt, actually. It's okay. I have a background in architecture prior to law. So I guess one might say I've gone from helping to design buildings to now drafting contracts about those buildings, or unfortunately, litigating about those buildings. And so you might be wondering, why is a lawyer here kicking off this conference on technology and design and construction? I can profess that lawyers are pretty low tech. We don't have any fancy graphics. I can't show you clash detection. It's our talks are usually pretty dry. But over the course of today, you'll hear from really great speakers who will show you these fascinating things that BIM can do, how to use BIM in different projects, and what to do with all that data. And so you'll see how BIM can bring efficiencies to construction processes. And you'll think, oh, that's great. We can save so much on time and costs. But what if there is a small little worry in the back of your mind about the risks that might come with technology? And what if these fears are really holding you back or holding your companies back from taking hold of that technology and getting the best benefits of it? So I'm here to talk about those issues. And I'll say it now, and I'll say it again throughout the presentation, but really communication and dialogue are key. So no matter what the project is, no matter what technology you're using, it's always best to communicate and talk about these kinds of issues. And these, scary risks might become less scary the more we communicate about them and the more we understand them. And hopefully the more people get comfortable talking about these issues, the more widespread BIM will become used in Canada. This is as fancy as I get. So, I like to start off with these kind of slides just to show, from the dawn of time, we've had designers designing and builders making the space, turning the design into reality. And over time, sure, we've had some change in the tools, but really, I would say the process is still largely the same. You have designers doing the design and builders building. When I was studying architecture 20 years ago, we had one credit course in AutoCAD. And now I think 2D CAD is sort of becoming a thing of the past, and we're moving on to 3D visualization. But again, it's still design and it's still construction. And so BIM has been touted as this tool which allows project participants to work more collaboratively, to deliver workflow processes with fewer errors and improve schedule performance. Through BIM, architects and engineers and other design professionals can develop and test their plans before construction, driving more innovative design. BIM also facilitates visualization and sharing of ideas between clients, contractors, and major trades. So this is on the screen what's widely known as the McLeamy curve, and you're probably all familiar with it, but it just captures this idea that the earlier design can be made or changed, or any issues can be detected, the greater the ability to improve on efficiencies and reduce cost growth. So BIM figures prominently as a way to figure out issues at an early stage, as opposed to the more traditional CAD workflow. I put up this map. Unfortunately, it's from 2017. Couldn't find an updated one, but essentially it shows just the rate of BIM adoption globally. The global demand for the BIM market was valued at $3.5 billion in 2016, and it's estimated to reach $10.4 billion by 2022. So that's growing at a rate of 19%. You can see on the map, I don't know if you can read it, but green is essentially the most advanced in terms of BIM adoption, and the yellow is the least advanced. The red indicates countries where mandates are in place. And so you'll see a lot of countries in Europe and Asia have mandates in place for BIM. Unfortunately, Canada is in the gray, where they say that about 30% of the industry is using BIM, but we don't have a federal or provincial governments mandating the use of BIM. But that might be something in the future that could help drive the adoption of BIM in Canada. And here's just another quick slide to show you that, internationally, people are talking about developing common standards. So the ISO came out with this new standard in early 2019. The standards provide recommendations for a framework to manage information, including exchanging, recording, versioning, and organizing for all project participants throughout the life cycle of an asset. And I just, raise this to show that, again, internationally, people are communicating about BIM and what BIM is to look like. And so some of the questions that you might have or you might have heard being raised involve the legal risks around BIM, right? So will a contractor at some point become liable for design? Who is liable when multiple parties are authoring a common model? What can other project participants use the model for? And who owns the model? Well, believe it or not, people have discussed these questions and have come up with standard form contracts to address the uncertainties. And so around the world, this is just a little snapshot of what is out there and what is available. And these are all BIM contract appendices. So they're designed to be used with standard industry contracts. You've got the top one there is our own IBC document that was developed at the end of, it was released at the end of 2014. And again, all of these contracts are there to really help encourage BIM use. To ease fears about risk and liability. And they're there so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel every time they would like to use BIM on a project. So some of the common elements that all these standard form contracts have, I'll go through them here, but they address some of these questions that people have, right? So liabilities, who's responsible for what? Most of the contracts are pretty clear that designers still, have their design obligations, and contractors are not going to get tagged with some kind of design liability just because they participate in the modeling. Most of these contracts deal with scope and model requirements, right? So they'll set out the definitions of model elements and levels of development, criteria, and authorized uses. Most of them will either require or recommend that a BIM management and execution plan be put in place in addition to that contract appendix, right? So this is where the parties should talk about all of these issues in advance. Who is the BIM model manager? How are we actually going to BIM this project? So most of these standard form contracts will provide some sort of, either they'll provide a template or they'll trigger the parties to talk about the plan. Reliance, this is a key, for lawyers, this is a key aspect of any contract. What can I use the model for? How can I rely on these pieces? Can I use it for the purposes of estimating? Or am I only just getting a general sense of the project? The common element, again, of BIM ownership and IP rights, or intellectual property rights, sorry. So the contracts will address, who owns the copyright and which element, and what rights the owner has to the model. Interoperability and compatibility. The contracts will define the BIM software, specify how data is to be transmitted, and last but certainly not least, security. So contracts will often define the effort which must be taken to address security issues, and who is responsible for managing this, because as we all know, BIM is data rich and is likely prone to cyber attacks. So you have to talk about how you're securing the data that is going into the BIM model. So I thought I would, we talked about these ideas broadly, and I thought I would actually take you through the IBC Contract Appendix. Has anyone in here used the BIM Appendix? Okay, has anyone in here used a contract ever dealing with BIM? Okay, that's good. We're getting there. So, I would obviously, as a lawyer, encourage people to start thinking about these ideas up front at the early stages when everyone is still in the mood to work well together, right before the crap hits the fan. I have kids now, so I have to PG myself, but it's always good to communicate and talk about these things in advance, right? So here is this lovely contract appendix that IBC put out. It's about 7 pages. It is not a complex, thick, crazy document. It's a really good tool just to even read through so that you can understand, oh right, there are these issues which might pop up during the project and how can we best address them now, and maybe we can get agreement so that halfway through we're not having a fight about something. So this IBC Contract Appendix, that's been endorsed by the RAIC, CCDC, ACEC, and again, it's meant to be used with standard form contracts. And so there's, you see at the bottom, don't know how great your eyes are, but there are 6 sections generally, and we'll walk through some of them, but really the 6th other terms and conditions is sort of like a fill your own, choose your own adventure type thing. So it's a big blank box, but we'll walk you through some of the other sections. So section 1 is a general section. And here we talk about things like requiring all project participants to sign onto this BIM appendix, right? So that everyone knows at the outset of the project, we're all on the same playing field. We all are bound by the same rules. Another clause here, nothing, and I said this at the outset, nothing is going to take away from the role of the architect or engineer to provide design services in accordance with their roles and with the applicable laws in their province. The participation of a contractor or subcontractor is not going to constitute design services. And standard of care is another question people ask a lot about. Well, if I'm participating in BIM, all of a sudden is my standard of care heightened? Is it changed in any way? And this really attempts to just keep the status quo that was found in your original contract. So if you're using one of the standard, CCDCs, or if you're using the RAIC form, it's just the ordinary standard that is in there, unless somehow you've agreed to heighten it. Section 2 deals with copyright. And so I'll pull out a couple of sections here. So the copyright of the model element in the model belongs to and remains with that author. But what each author is doing is granting the other parties non-exclusive license to use the model for design and construction purposes. And you can even see here that it talks about giving people the right to alter the model for the purposes of making derivative models. But of course, there's the good catch-all. If there are alterations being made, those are being done at the sole risk of the person who's doing those alterations. And so, here the owner is granted a license to use or alter the models. Again, the use and alteration of the models is at the risk of the owner. And here's one little kicker about payment. So if someone's not getting paid for their services, then that party has the right to suspend or revoke access to that particular element of their model. Section 3 is about risk and reliance. I just pulled out one clause here. Again, it says if the party uses or relies on the model in a way that is inconsistent with authorized uses identified in the protocol, which protocol people have to talk about and formulate, then that use and reliance will be at their own risk. Then we get into the fillable sections. So, 4.2, you get to decide what portions of the project are being modeled, what the uses are for that model, and whether or not post-construction models will be delivered. And then this is the last section. So this just is a reminder that the parties need to actually develop a protocol. So this will set out at a minimum these 5 elements. Now, as a companion document to the IBC 100, there is a 200 document, and that actually has in there all of the levels of development defined. It has a table that you can fill out to say who is responsible for what model element and to what LOD and at what milestone. So here are just a few examples of how IBC's appendix is being worked into CCDC contracts. So this is the new CCDC 30, relatively new CCDC 30. It was released last year. It's for IPD. Actually, Canada's first IPD contract project was done here in Saskatchewan. But IPD is a really great way. I think it meshes in well with the concept of BIM in that it is a collaborative procurement model. And so here, right in GC 1.1.9 of the contract, it says, notwithstanding everything that's in here about copyright, if the parties are going to use BIM, then you're going to have to, insert something to do with BIM at Schedule F. And when you flip to Schedule F, there's a blank sheet and it reminds you to put in the IBC Contract Appendix. And here's another example of how our standard forms contemplate the use of the IBC Appendix. This is the RAIC document. And here it says if BIM is going to be used, again, you should insert the IBC Contract Appendix. And so people always like to hear war stories. They want to hear about fights concerning BIM. But I have to say there are not very many fights that we've been able to find. So this means that either people are not fighting over BIM, or they're dealing with it in private arbitrations, so it's not publicly available. But I think the fact that certain countries have been using BIM for a decade, other countries have been using it for longer, and the fact that we can only find a handful of publicly available cases is a pretty good suggestion that there's not too much litigation involving BIM. And we'll go through some of these BIM cases because I'd just like to show you that I don't actually think that even though they're BIM cases, that the issues are arising out of BIM only. I think they have to deal with other issues that are prevalent on all projects. They're, to deal with delay, cost growth, and scope change. So we'll take a look at them and you can see as well. So this is the first known case about BIM. It's a 2011 case in the States. The parties' names were kept private. But you can see here that there was an MEP contractor who ran out of room while they were doing the construction, because it turned out that there was supposed to be a very specific sequence for the installation of their work. And so it's called BIM litigation, but I don't know that necessarily it is BIM litigation. When you think about the communication that needs to happen on any project, can we look at this scenario and say that this issue arose purely as a result of BIM? Because I think, as I said before, communication is key no matter what the technology is that you're using. Here's another case that came out of the States. It's a 2015 case. Here, the subcontractor, NAMI, is fighting over some change orders, and it wants to get paid for these change orders, which it says comes out of the BIM model. And there's a clause in the contract that says, look, if the hospital says no to Walsh, then the subcontractor, NAMI, is bound by that decision. So NAMI tries to get out of it, and they say, well, this, it comes out of the model. The model is not a contract document, so therefore I'm not, held to this subcontract clause. But the court said, no, the BIM is actually a contract document. It was derived from contract documents, and so your case is dismissed. But again, looking at this, would you say it really does come out of BIM, or is this just another payment dispute, a claim for extras? I would say it's the latter. We've got a case that came out in the UK in 2017. This was a project where the consultant was looking for, I think, close to £500,000 in fees from the contractor. The contractor said no. There was a big dispute about it, so the consultant blocked access to the model. So the contractor had to move quickly, asked the court for an injunction so it could get access to the model, and the injunction was granted. And so the fees that were in dispute were ordered to be paid into court, security for the claim. But in the meantime, the contractor had access to the BIM so that they could keep going on with their work. And again, I suggest to you that this isn't necessarily strictly a BIM issue. It's an issue that could arise if you were using pen and paper to draw something and you wanted access to those designs. And this is the last case. So here, this is out of Ontario. Walsh developed this model. The TTC previously had access to it. Then litigation arose. And this is actually in the context of litigation. The parties were talking about having access to the model in order to prove their claims. And so here the model was, it was found to be relevant to all of the claims that were being advanced. And the parties did agree at the end of the day to share to give access to the model again. So this isn't purely a BIM issue, I would say. I think it again arises from payment disputes, delays, and so forth that you see on all kinds of projects. So I'm just going to close out my presentation with some of the survey results that came out of the second annual BIM report that was executed by University of Toronto in conjunction with ResCon and the Toronto BIM community. So they surveyed about 398 respondents from a range of professions within the AEC industry. And the largest group of respondents were BIM specialists and architects, followed by those in construction and in engineering. And so I brought out this slide to show, the survey asked a number of questions, one of which was, what are the main barriers to using BIM? And they broke down the responses in terms of industry issues, individual issues, and corporate issues. And I'll note here, that the biggest, seems like the biggest challenge is resistance to change. And legal issues just sort of barely squeaks on there. At corporate issues, it comes in fourth place after doubts on return of investment, lack of senior management support, and lack of in-house expertise. So I've actually spoken with some colleagues who work in-house, some lawyers who work in-house at international design firms, and they actually say that their insurers appreciate when they use BIM. It tends to lower their premiums because they think, okay, well, here's a tool that can allow design errors to be caught at an earlier stage. And so from an insurance perspective, it gives them some comfort that their insured is using BIM. And here are the top barriers broken down by discipline. So you can see here that resistance to change is noted as the barrier, the top barrier by all of these separate disciplines. And I'll note that legal issues does not even factor in here. So I think, how do we mitigate BIM risks going forward, and how do we get more comfortable with it? I think there are a couple of tips. So, be clear about expectations, roles, and responsibilities right from the outset. It's encouraging to see that 4 people in here have used a BIM contract of some sort. Perhaps, the more we talk about these things, you'll start to see them more and more in the industry. Communication. So communicate while you're setting the project up and throughout the project. BIM cannot correct a failure to communicate. And so you got to keep doing this right from the outset through to the end. And then maintain records. This is just so that, if anything ever happens, you can go back and trace where the issue arose. And I'm just going to end now on this quote. It's from a French composer, Pierre Schaeffer. And so he was known as the originator of electronic music. And when someone interviewed him about technology and music, he said, the world changes materially, science makes advances in technology understanding, but the world of humanity doesn't change. So I think this statement recognizes that we can make advances and changes in the way we work and design and build. We can change the tools, but at the center of it, we're still human, and our nature doesn't change. And so, we'll always want to know who is supposed to be doing what, when are we supposed to be doing it, why are we supposed to be doing it, who is going to deliver it to who, and what can we use it for. And so, as I said at the outset, communication is key. We have to invest as much time and energy up front as we do using the technology itself. And I think once everyone gets comfortable with this idea and discussing the issues, we'll be able to approach BIM with more ease and really embrace the technology. So thank you again for having me, and enjoy the rest of the presentations today.